Welcome, boys and girls. Costin here with a discussion about the Wood Elves, who are honestly one of the most useless races in the entire game at the moment. In fact, what's the purpose of even having Wood Elves at the moment, given how they play out, both in terms of an AI perspective and also how you play them out directly? Because if we think about it from an AI perspective, Wood Elves have only a couple of settlements, they have an annoying army, but they only have a couple of those armies, and they don't build those settlements properly. So they're at most a speed bump for virtually everyone else, including some of the worst races in the game, but not really a genuine threat. So they kind of are the equivalent of what Beastmen were as a joke in both Warhammer 1 and most of Warhammer 2. And also, by the way, Beastmen are still a joke as a race when you're dealing with them. And having races that are just speed bumps or annoyances that you have to deal with, in particular in this case as chaos, is not something that adds anything tangible to the game. Of course, Wood Elves are a powerful race. I don't think anyone can dispute that particular point. But just because you have a powerful race doesn't mean it's a good race. That's one of the things that I constantly see on Reddit. It's like, oh, why don't we play cool races? Well, here's a race that should be a lot cooler than it is and ends up being a complete snooze fest of a race because just being really powerful does not make you cool. Let's go over the details of this one because I think it is important to talk about this, especially because Lorem kind of played the important role in the end times. I mean, it was where basically everyone gathered up, the fellowship, if you will, and then decided to fight against Arcane at Midnight. So here's the big discussion with respect to that. When you're playing a Wood Elf campaign, it can be Draika, it can be Durfu, it can be Orion, it can be Sisters. The singular best army that you have basically 3 armies. They're really good so far above everything else that doesn't matter what else you can use. Some will argue about melee infantry, to which I reply, I'm introducing you to Treekin. Heavy armor, heavy leadership. Incredible resistance to both physical and missile damage, and their only weakness is against fire. And even against fire, unless you're dealing with like certain Sinchian units or Castorf units, that's not going to matter that much. I've seen these guys go up against entire stacks of units and win. Oh, but you shouldn't play the game from an optimal perspective. Well, doesn't matter what you're playing as, because here's the thing: you got Treekin, then you've got the combination of Weight Watchers, Deepwood Scouts, and Glade Guard that are just like wiping the floor with everything else. And specifically, if you're playing Sisters of Twilight, you have Hawk Riders. Everything else is pure fluff. And you can play pure fluff, but as I mentioned just yesterday when this was a topic of conversation on the Reddit, as I mentioned yesterday, I wish we could play around with cool armies and not just curb stomp everything else. Because if you play with anything else as Wood Elves, like if you wait the time, if you build an army of everything else, you just end up in a position where it's like the AI is not capable of providing any kind of meaningful challenge to you. So if your idea of a gaming experience is just to screw around, and I know it is, then yeah, Wood Elves don't offer anything tangible. On top of that, their entire mechanic of only having a couple of settlements but then having teleportation across the world ends up also being a purely fluffy campaign mechanic. Because with the roots, you can just basically not care about the settlements you're losing. You can not care about the Oak of Ages in itself being conquered by various factions. You can decide not to care. As long as you have the ability of traversing the entire map and not caring about holding anything in any location, you're in a situation where you can just screw around. And the problem I would have with that, there's never any real tension point with a Wood Elven campaign. There's never any point where you're playing a Wood Elf campaign and you're thinking to yourself, gee, I really need to get this done properly, because if I don't do it properly, things are going to happen that are pretty bad for me. That's never really going to be a tension point for Wood Elves, and losing a campaign, I mean, it's always in general difficult to lose a campaign, but it is especially difficult when you can traverse the damn map. The only foes that you have are potentially some factions that might become an issue, potentially, and even then, you still have to account for the fact that most of those factions are not going to be able to produce any kind of meaningful response against you. And all the events are just just pure nonsense. Like, for instance, over here, turn 2, or shortly thereafter, I'll get an invasion that I'll have to deal with Durfu, which is like, whatever. And then I just go around and deal with the dwarves, and that's GG, well played, campaign is over. Maybe I take Paravon and give it to Orion, maybe I don't. It doesn't necessarily matter what I decide to do in this context, because whatever I could decide to do is made irrelevant by the fact that the campaign has nothing tangible on offer from the perspective of intriguing me, creating that challenge, creating that situation where I have to make certain decisions, where I have to make those kind of, those kind of trade-offs, which you should be forced to make in a campaign. You can gain so much money in a campaign playing the Wood Elves, it's completely ridiculous. And that's kind of where we have to really talk about the core issue, the core problem, if you will, which is like, when you play a campaign in general, in a game, in a video game, what you're looking for overall, sure, some people might just want the curb stomp, some people might want it, but I think what I think we all can agree on is we want a cool experience. I think that's the most universal thing you can talk about video games. Sitting around in your trees and doing nothing is not, by any metric, in any way, shape, or form, a cool fucking experience. And that's where Wood Elves do end up failing. They end up failing not because they can't offer a cool experience, but because every time they come close to offering such a cool experience, they end up faltering, and that is where the problems come in. Like, yeah, look at this army. You might think, oh, you lose. It's like, no, I still have 2 Treekin units. Those Treekin units will win anyway. So, yeah. So much for the invasion force of the dwarves, I suppose. And it would genuinely be nice if that wasn't the case, but it is the case in how things play out at the moment. And it could be so much better, so much more interesting, so much more compelling than what they are. And don't even get me started on the multiplayer side of things, because that's really the reason I'm making this video. Because I know people in the multiplayer community of Warhammer 3. And they, and some people, obviously not universal, but some people have a very dim view of how Wood Elves really end up playing as a race, and could be so much more interesting. I mean, I think the idea of Wood Elves, Forest Elves, or Mirkwood Elves, if we're talking about Lord of the Rings, all that stuff, Ents, should be cool. And more often than not, and this has been the case across many video games, more often than not, it ends up being a complete dismal failure for whatever the reason might be. And it probably shouldn't be. And yet, it ends up being so because, like, Forest Elves with long-range bows and powerful Ents is a combination that developers struggle to really handle in a good, solid fashion. Which is quite a shame when you really think about it, because it shouldn't be difficult to handle. I mean, even Ents in Battle for Middle-earth, which I played recently, they're very weak to fire. Not the weakness to fire that you see here in the game, but a couple of flaming shots, and you have to worry about that constantly when you're playing with them. They're really powerful, but they're weak to fire, really so. Here, it's like, you get Treekin, you get Treemen, hell, even Dryads, they're weak and auto-resolve, but they're really solid enough in terms of actual balance. But Treekin just have that mass combination, ranged issues. Yeah, that's where the problems kind of come in. Anyway, that's all I had to say. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. Stay tuned for more.